I'm Juana Treff. I'm the product team manager here at To Checkout, and I'll be moderating this webinar today. We'll be talking about a subject that's very dear to me, and that's SaaS customer onboarding. In my previous roles as a customer onboarding a product manager, but also as a client success manager, I've had the chance to plan, coordinate, and consult on a different range of markets. And across the board, one thing was clear, and that is that onboarding is vital when it comes to turning users into happy customers. And it doesn't mean just getting customers to log into your product. So if you're here to learn how to create a powerful onboarding experience, you're in the right place. And not only that, but you're in the right company, because with me today is our very special guest speaker, Wes Bush. Wes is the founder of Product-Led Institute, who teaches SaaS leaders how to flip the traditional sales playbook on its head and ignite their growth engine with the product-led growth methodology. Besides teaching marketing courses at various universities and institutes like the CXL Institute, he also has a first-hand experience as a marketing and demand gen practitioner at high-growth companies like Vidyard, for example. He's also a book author. Congratulations, Wes, on your product-led growth book. I understand it's been very well received in the market. And it's an honor having you here today, especially since I know what you have prepared for this webinar. And just to give the audience a quick sneak peek of what's coming, you've promised to show us how to change the onboarding experience to avoid user drop-off and maximize adoption. You'll guide us a bit through the best ways to use what we call the bowling alley framework to convert free users to paying customers. And our audience today will find out when is the right time to employ a freemium model versus a free trial model, and how they can potentially grow their MRR up to about 20%, right? Wes, I'm very happy to have you here, and I cannot wait for you to dive into the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I am excited to dive into onboarding and really just how to turn those users into happy paying customers. And so I'm just going to share my screen with you, and just let me know if you can see it, just so I'm not talking to myself here.
You're all good.
Perfect. So the focus today is really just on how we can optimize our onboarding, but I don't just want to stop there. You see, whenever it comes to whether it's anything with marketing or onboarding, you really have to have that process. And so I'm not just going to show you some tactics that can improve your onboarding, but I really want to take a step back and focus on what does that process look like. And so I'm going to share that bowling alley framework with you, so that by the end of this, really my goal for this is to make sure that you think about onboarding in a completely new way. And not just that, but you have a better way of approaching onboarding, and you understand how it all fits together and how you can improve your own onboarding experience. So if you stay until the end and are watching this right now, what I want you to do to get the most value out of this webinar is, as we're going through each section of this presentation, I want you to actually take notes and jot down, like, what are some things you could do today or maybe in the next couple of weeks to really improve your onboarding flow. Because it's one thing to just listen to webinars or online content, but it's totally another thing to really just apply it. And whenever you take action, that is when you're actually going to be learning and remembering this stuff. So if you get cool results, let me know. I love to hear about that stuff. So just a little bit about me. I really focus on, with my business, Product-Led Institute, on one problem. And that is really just how to turn users into happy paying customers. It's such an odd thing to love, but I am just so passionate about this particular topic. And since I've been at this for a while now, and really just helping companies all over the spectrum from 500K to over 500 million, I've started to see patterns whenever it comes to onboarding and really just understanding like what works and what doesn't. And so on this particular presentation, I'm hopefully going to be sharing a lot more of the stuff that will work, so you can skip the whole process of kind of just trial and error and figuring out all the stuff that doesn't work. So that's really what makes this presentation different. I am a practitioner at heart, and I really do help these businesses and really dissect these onboarding flows and see what works and what doesn't. And so although I can say I've done some things right, if I'm being totally honest with you, I've probably done a lot more things wrong whenever it comes to onboarding. And so my goal here is, since I've discovered all these things the hard way, I want to give you the cheat code and really just show you the easy way to make your users turn into happy paying customers. This isn't supposed to be a salesy way of let's just turn those users into happy paying customers. No, like they don't become happy paying customers unless you actually provide value to them. So that's really the goal here, is we're going to make successful users, and by doing so, we're going to give them a pretty good reason to become a paying customer. So are you ready? Let's dive in and really show you the easy way to get this done. So just before we kind of dig into the framework, I do want to take a step back and say, all right, this actually works. And one of the recent case studies I had was actually with snappa.com. So what's so cool about this one example is we literally just did one thing. We removed the email confirmation step in their onboarding flow, which was adding friction to the whole process. And almost overnight, we saw that 20% MRR boost, which was incredible. And so whenever you're thinking about improving your onboarding, it's usually one of those things that kind of falls in between a lot of different teams or responsibilities. But sometimes things like this, even the email confirmation step, that gets in the way of everyone signing up and actually getting into your product, it can really have profound effects for your business. And so that's actually why I'm so excited about this topic, because when we're going through this presentation, you're probably going to find some quick wins right away that could actually have that maybe 10 to 20% MRR boost just waiting for you, because there's some serious low-hanging fruit. So I am going to say results are not typical. I actually have done and optimized hundreds of SaaS onboarding flows, but I would not be surprised if you could see at least some similar results whenever you're implementing these changes. So I want you to meet my friends, the bowling alley framework. And so this framework is really just the whole process that I use whenever I work with SaaS companies from 500K to 500 million to really improve their onboarding process. And it's actually really straightforward. So whenever we think of bowling, whenever you start, let's say it's your first time bowling and you roll that ball down the alley, how common is it to get it in the gutter? Now, if you're like me, it's almost like guaranteed gonna happen. You're gonna get that ball in the gutter. And so whenever we think about signing up for our new product, what often happens to a lot of people, because it is new, it's something they haven't done before, they go in the gutter. And so that's what happens whenever they go in the new product. There's a lot of things they don't know what to do, they get lost, and then they find something better to do and they're gone. And so the majority of SaaS users that sign up for your product will not come back after that first experience. So that's why it's really important to make sure that in that first experience, we need to make sure that they get a strike. And so depending on how complex your product is, that could be a really big ask. So sometimes we need to break it down and make sure that we set that realistic expectation. So for instance, a product like Drift or Hotjar, those are pretty useless products unless you upload a script like JavaScript to the website so you can actually get a conversation or see a heat map of your website. And so there's simple things like that, where if we built a straight line to get to that outcome, we would have a much better way of actually getting people to that outcome in the product. So the straight line is where we're going to start. That is the 80-20 of the bowling alley framework. But then on the right-hand side, we have the product bumper. So what happens whenever someone gets into the product? Well, we want to actually guide them. So whether it's using helpful tool tips or bumpers, to really just kind of poke people and show them like, here's where to pay attention to. And I'm not talking about using tooltips to just show people everywhere in your products. I've seen examples of that too, and it's cringeworthy how many little tooltips people put up to kind of walk you through the entire product, and that you get nowhere in those scenarios. So what I'm really focusing in on here is let's use the tools to really get people to success in the product. And then on the left-hand side here, we have the conversational bumper. So this is really using whether it's email or SMS to really catch people where they are and bring them back on the straight line. So back to that first example of drift. So if I don't upload that JavaScript to my website, well, send me an email about it and get me out of that gutter back onto the straight line so that I can see success in the product. So I'm sure by now you can see it's relatively straightforward in terms of how to kind of break it down, but how do you do it? So we're going to walk through each of these, and I'm going to give you some ideas on how you can do straight line onboarding, build that conversational and product bumper. So let's dive in. So the first three elements you need, you know those. Let's dive in. So part one, straight line onboarding. This is where you need to start. This is really where you're going to see the most value. Even if you just implement one thing from this webinar, it would be to build your straight line onboarding. And so this isn't going to be one of those webinars where I just talk and talk and talk and show you all these case studies and strategies on how to do this stuff. No, I'm actually going to walk you through exactly how to do this, and you might be dumbfounded because it's actually pretty straightforward. And so the reason why the straight line onboarding experience is actually so vital for your onboarding is because 40 to 60% of users will sign up for your product and never come back, according to Intercom. So this is a really big statistic, and I ask you right now, if you have access to your product analytics, or you, let's say, even have a data scientist at your company, ask them, how many people do we lose once they sign up for that product in the first day? And so you'll probably find it's around this, because I have not come to a company where it is not actually within this range. So that's a lot of people. And one of the reasons why they don't come back is really just because they didn't see success in the product. If they really got a strike, do you think if everyone who started bowling, who got a strike the first time and was king of bowling, they want to try bowling again? I think so. So that's really what we're trying to optimize for here, is that return user and making sure we give them a good reason to come back. So now, in order to build that straight line, there's essentially three things you need to do. First one is map out the path. So I'm going to actually show you. This is back and showing you that example here. So what am I going to do is actually show you how you can build a straight line. So I am going to pretend I am going to sign up for Canva. So I'm going to say I'm interested in how to make a poster. Well, maybe money too, but how to make a poster. Let's go with that one. So here I'm just going to go down, click to Canva's link, and then right here on the landing page, I'm just going to see, okay, what can I do here? So I'm looking at all the call to actions. It's really asking me to start designing a poster. Okay, so I'm going to, let's see, just start designing a poster, click the call to action. Now, since I have an account, I was actually able to skip all of the registration processes, but I did actually track that at a previous time, but I didn't want to do it on this webinar since it does take a lot of time, and I can drive the point home in Canva in a second. So what I basically did right now is I signed up for Canva, and I can pick a poster, and I'm just going to edit it real quick. And I could basically be done once I edit the text and click that nice download button. So in terms of your product experience, that was a really quick time to value, don't you think? And so whenever we're breaking this experience down, like this is a very straight line onboarding experience, and it's going to be pretty darn hard to compete with that. But if we look at all the steps it took for us to get there, well, essentially I had to search how to make a poster. So onboarding, this is gonna get controversial because I know some people don't agree, but onboarding starts the minute, the second someone actually searches for your brand or they see advertisement for you. That first touch point is when onboarding starts, because that really sets the expectation of what you can do in the product. So start whenever you're breaking this down, like have that first touch point there. So this is what someone wants to do. Where do they go? Where's that first touch point, whether it's an ad or the landing page? And so what do people do on this page? So in this case, I clicked the call to action. Then I went through all the registration steps that luckily you didn't have to go through. But then on this part, when I was in the product, I just selected the poster, edited the text, and I added 1 or 2 elements. And once I was done to showcase the poster, I just clicked download. And so this is really just like the strike whenever you think about your product and how we can drive people more towards there. And so that whole experience was really pretty straightforward. And so we mapped out the path. And next, what we're going to be doing is really just labeling every checkpoint. So how it really works, if you want to build a straight line, you really need to set it up like a highway where everything's the green light. Everyone goes and there's no stopping involved. And so whenever we think of a terrible experience, we think of, let's say, sitting in traffic, there's tons of red lights or yellow lights, you almost just made it. And so that's a frustrating experience. We want to make sure that people are just able to fly by and get to that strike in your product. And so the way I really recommend labeling everything here is that if it's a green light, this is a step that you absolutely need. So here's an example. Selecting the poster. That's a step you really do need if you're going to create a poster. Editing the text, I mean, sure, you're not just going to take the template and download it unless it's exactly what it is, which that would be pretty tricky to do at scale. And so editing the text is definitely a must-have, but do they have to pick the font? No, they don't have to do that. Just edit the text and it will look great. And so that's what I want you to think about in terms of your onboarding. Like, what are those green lights? The next part is just the yellow lights. So, okay, what are some of those maybe advanced steps? And so this is one I added here. Let's say Canva was using the little helpful guide tips, like say, here's photos, here's elements, here's text, here's background, here's uploads. If they really took me through that whole experience, it would have actually detracted from me publishing this poster in such few steps. And so if there are steps like that in your products which really get in the way of maybe that first time strike, well, maybe we could use them later, but let's get rid of them for that first experience. So that's what I recommend getting rid of, at least for that first experience, but we can introduce it maybe for that second or third time user. And then red lights are really just things that we could totally get rid of and it wouldn't affect the overall experience. So an example here is, let's say if I had to activate my email as soon as I signed up for the product. That is something that adds a ton of friction that a lot of people don't realize. For instance, if I have to activate my email, well, first step first is I have to go to my email and then I have to see, okay, which email is it? Do I have to wait for it? And once I find it, then I have to click on it and then I have to re-sign in. And so there's usually about 5 steps in that one step. And 4 of those steps are outside of your product. And so there's a lot of competing priorities in terms of what you can do. If someone goes in their email, they might get distracted by something else. I know I usually do. There was even just the last week, I was giving a workshop on how to do this straight line onboarding system. And while I was going to book an Uber to go to that workshop, I checked my phone and I had the intention of checking Uber. And then I was looking at my phone and then I was on LinkedIn and I put my phone down and then I asked myself, like, why did you check your phone again? And then it finally struck me. I'm like, oh my gosh, I totally picked up my phone thinking I was going to book the Uber and now I was on LinkedIn and I just wasted 5 minutes. So it's so easy whenever you have these competing priorities in our lives because we're all busy people and it's easy to do. So if you can do one thing, what I would recommend you to do is really to build out your straight lines. So the first step here is map out the path. So I want you to write down every single step, even like your email, that's a step. Confirm email, that's another step. Password, CDA, write down every single step it takes for someone to become have that first successful experience in the product, and then start labeling like, is this necessary for now? Is this a must-have? Or could we totally get rid of this step? And then build out the green line experience, and that will help people get more strikes in your product. So once we're done that straight line experience, what you can start doing is building product bumpers into the overall experience. So how it really works is what we're focusing in on here is just showing users like what can you do within the product with using helpful tooltips. So there's actually so many kinds of product bumpers that we could talk about this for a really long time. So there's product tiers, progress bars, checklists. You can read all those. But what I want to just go through is the top 4 that I always love to use in onboarding because they're extremely effective. And so I'll kind of tie in how this really works with straight line onboarding experiences. So for the first part here, product tours are really important at the beginning of your onboarding journey because sometimes, like let's say it's in this example, you have to choose your help desk. And dependent on which one of these you pick, then the whole onboarding experience is different. So it's really important to use product tours at the beginning of the journey if you have a complex product. Another example is say, like, let's sign up for Wave Accounting. Well, do you want to do invoicing first? Do you want to manage your finances? What is the main problem you're trying to solve for? And if you have a multi-product product, it can really help people just select, okay, I'm interested in this part of your product. And then they can experience that and not get bombarded with the full one-size-fits-all onboarding journey that we all love. And so the next part is progress bars. So this is a section right below here, and you'll see 52% here. So progress bars are really important for increasing motivation. And so why I really like them is because oftentimes whenever it comes to onboarding specifically, a lot of people don't know how long it might take. And if let's say there's 10 steps and someone's at 8 steps and they don't see a progress bar, chances are they might actually leave right then and there, even though they're so close. But if they see that progress bar and they see, oh wow, I'm already 80% the way done, they're actually more inclined to stay. And that's actually true, same thing, the same motivation kind of trigger works with checklists. And this was actually one of the experiences that Quora rolled out, where they had a checklist that just showed people, like, here's how many steps you've done, here's the rest you have to do in order to set up an account. And it was one of their biggest activation levers that they used as a business. So it can be extremely powerful for you to use, whether it's checklists or progress bars, to really just show people, like, here's exactly what you need to do in your onboarding, and this is what you need to do. But you got to be pretty picky about what you have in checklists, because I'm going to call them out on this, but for HubSpot, for instance, I have been a HubSpot customer for 2 years, and I still have a getting started checklist that I have not completed because some of those items, I'm like, I just don't care. I don't need to do that in order to successfully use the products. And so you really want to make sure that whatever you do have in the checklist is something that you really do need someone to do in order to see value in the product. For instance, if it's sign up for a demo, that might not be something everyone has to do, especially if you have the self-service product. So the next part here is onboarding tooltips. These come in many, many flavors. And what you can do really well whenever you're using them is just show people through your product what they need to pay attention to. And so the good thing about onboarding tooltips that I really like is once you get someone into the product, then it can be a little bit overwhelming for some people if they don't have that helpful hand to say, like, here's where you need to pay attention to. And so at the beginning, I was really mentioning that one example of when people abuse onboarding tooltips. So here's an example. I won't name the company, but I signed up for the product, and then it literally walked me through every single feature. It was so painful. And by the end of that experience, it took about 2 minutes, since I was curious how long it would take. And I got nowhere. I had little to do with like actually achieving the outcome I signed up for the product for, but I had experienced and seen everything about the product for all the features. And I wasn't wanting to come back because I signed up to solve a problem. I didn't just want to see what the software looked like. that doesn't matter to me. And so whenever it comes to using these onboarding tooltips, see if you can align them with your straight line experience. So for instance, like edit text, let's say that was a tricky step, let's show them where to do that in the product, where to pick that poster, and really guide people and make sure it is really straightforward for them to do. And so the last one I'm going to mention here for product bumpers that is, if you have a SaaS application, is probably one that you probably should use. And this is in the dashboard. So for many SaaS applications, when you sign up, is usually just a blank slate. There's nothing there. You haven't integrated anything. There's no fun data that's specific to your business. And so what's really great with empty states is you can show people, just like the checklist, okay, here's exactly what you need to do in order to set up your account. And it's a really incredible way to increase your activation rate and just make sure that you're getting people to check off the items that are most important. And so what do you put in here? That would be what's in your straight line. And so this is where it really comes all together, is you're trying to make sure that you're bumping people to the right part of the product and guiding them to what makes most sense for them so they can see success and really strike out. So that's pretty much it for the product bumpers. There's a million different ways you could really use them, but it's best used in the combination with the straight line onboarding and making sure you're using those same steps. So the last part here is conversational bumpers. And so heaven forbid, people will sign up for your product and leave. It's crazy. Some people do it, but if we want to really bring them back, there's, whether it's email or SMS, there's tons of ways we can do that. And so, like I was mentioning, the first time I introduced this, whenever it comes to, let's say, Drift, and we sign up with the product, we don't upload the JavaScript on our website, let's ping them about that. And so what I'm really going for here is trigger-based emails. How can we catch people and make sure that we walk them through every single step of the straight line onboarding experience? So if we think about this, it's not on the map here, but what I'll do is I'll circle with my mouse. So if you can see that, that should be helpful. So let's say the first step here is sign up for an account. Second step here is actually uploading the script. Third step here is having that first conversation. Third step here might be having the whole 100% or sorry, 100 conversations with someone on your website. And like, once you get to that point, it's a strike. You have a 20 or maybe 30% chance of becoming a paying customer because you really understand the value. And so along each of those points, what are those messages that you could make sure that people see so that they can see more value in the product? So there's a ton of examples of conversational bumpers. I mean, there's user onboarding emails, in-app messages, sales outreach. Your CS or customer success team can reach out, direct mail. I have actually seen that work pretty well too. It's a fun channel to go into. And so what we can do here is dive into the 8 most common user onboarding emails. And so these are the majority of the common ones where if, let's say, you have a free trial, you could really use every single one of these messages because it would be perfect for your business. Now, obviously the copy and everything you have to change, but I'd really recommend making sure you do have these 8 common emails for user onboarding emails. So the first one is really just make sure you welcome people whenever they do sign up for your product. It's nice, you know, when you sign up for a product and you actually see that people are excited about having you on board, and you remind them, like, why did you sign up? Here's why we built our company, and remind them of that reason. And what I love to do is really just urge them onto that first step of the journey. So in this case, maybe it's creating your dashboard, or what is that call to action to really help them get back onto that straight line because they're in their email now. How can we get them back into that product? And so the next thing is really usage tip emails. So usage tip emails, to give you an example with Soapbox. So if you're not familiar with Soapbox, it is a Chrome video recorder. And so if you want to record a video on, let's say, Chrome, it's super simple. And so I created my first video. And so whenever I did that, they reached out to me through this usage tip triggered email. and said, hey, you haven't shared your video and you should do that. And so this is a perfect example of really understanding, okay, how can someone get value out of their product and where do people drop off in that journey? And so by setting up triggered emails to really make sure that people, you nudge them along the straight line, it can really help you boost your activation rate. And so the sales switch emails, whenever you're looking at product data and understanding, okay, when is the best time to reach out, they can be super effective. This was an example by not Dropbox, but Databox, pretty similar. And so whenever I was creating dashboards, they just reached out to really help me get more use out of the product and build better dashboards. And so whenever we're thinking about traditional sales in a product-led business, it really isn't necessarily that salesy. If we reach out at the right time when someone's looking for help or maybe even already trying to solve this problem, it can be really effective way of making sure that we look at sales as much more like serving and really just helping people along. The next part is really just case study emails to help people along the straight line. And so oftentimes when people are making buying decisions, there is objections. And so one of the best ways to make these emails really powerful is to look at what are those most common objections and what are your customers saying to combat them, and use your customers to really knock down all of those objections. And then the next part is really just better life email. So if your product is actually useful, which I'm sure it is, let people know. How does it help them make their life better? What is that main value prop that you're going to help people experience in your product? The way I see the evolution of SaaS is really just you are building a product to deliver on that value proposition as fast as humanly possible. And so if you get your user onboarding right, you can help people experience your value much quicker than the traditional sales-led companies. And so the next part, if you do have a trial, is just make sure you have an expiry warning email. So let people know how much time they do have. Remind them actually why they signed up and what they can do in the product. And so this is a really great example by Squarespace. And once again, if you're trying to like screenshot everything or that, I can send the slides to you at the end too. So post-trial survey emails are incredible. So majority of the people, to be honest, when they sign up for your trial or freemium experience, they're just not going to convert. But most companies don't know why. And so this is one very quick thing you can do. This is an example by Autopilot. And so all they asked people is they said, all right, can you answer this quick survey? And so the first question here is, will you share why you decided not to buy Autopilot? So you have here a few options, still evaluating, not a fit, too complex. And so each of these items was linked up with another automation campaign. So if someone said it's too complex, they'll get an email saying, hey, talk to our customer success team. They are going to do a custom onboarding walkthrough to help you see success in the product. If it's too expensive, here's a discount code. And so if we think about a whole free trial experience as like, oh, people didn't convert, they're not interested in us, it's not necessarily true. There's very valid reasons why they didn't actually buy. And if we could help them along, albeit in an automated way, we can have a much better conversion rate at the end of the funnel. So the last one is people will actually convert. So what are we actually going to send them? And what I would recommend doing, which I've seen Spotify really nail, is once you do sign on as a customer, they really do an incredible job of just reminding you, like, here is the value, start seeing that value as soon as possible. And so this is really just trying to get people back onto that straight line and experiencing even more parts of the product. And this is really when we think about the straight line experience, this might even be some of those yellow items where we say, you know what, that feature is really incredible, but it's a little bit tricky. And maybe it's the perfect time to introduce it. Once people have that commitment, show them that next step, show them how they can get a ton of value out of your product. And so for the conclusion, I really do believe that the bowling alley framework is a powerful way to improve your onboarding, but it really does start with understanding what is that straight line look like. And it's not salesy in the sense of, oh, let's just send people a bunch of crappy sales emails and try and get them to convert into paying customers. But it really is if we strip everything out, it's rooted in just helping your users become so successful that it becomes a no-brainer for them to become a paying customer. And so the product and conversational bumpers are really just there to make sure that we catch people where they are in the journey and help them along so that more people can become successful. So to recap, if you really want to dive deeper into the bowling alley framework, I wrote a huge chapter. The biggest chapter in my book on product-led growth is all about this. So feel free to pick up a copy and learn all you want about the bowling alley framework. And so with that, I want to just leave this open for any questions that anyone has.
Yes, we actually do have a couple of questions. So, do you have your magic ball ready?
Yep, I'm good.
Perfect. One question is, does sample data help during onboarding?
So sample data is really interesting. Like whether you're trying to do, let's say, a test drive experience and show people like, here's what it looks like. But at the end of the day, nothing is going to compete with your own data and seeing what that looks like. And so if you're looking for a pretty good example of what that might look like for a SaaS company, there's a company called Clipfolio, KLIPFOLIO.com. And so I thought they did a pretty good job of showing people sample data, but then whenever you hovered over, let's say, some of the dashboards, it just said, like integrate your own kind of services. And so that was a great way to see, okay, what does the product look like? What are some of those outcomes? But if it is like a more taxing kind of ask, then I can also see what it looks like with my own data pretty quickly if I do that integration. So to answer that, yes, sample data can help, but if possible, I would try to lead with actually getting people to do the integrations or whatever they have to do in order to see useful data on their own.
If I may add here, usually zero data provides a limited understanding of more complex products where you need to go through a lot of hoops to integrate, while having some sample data ready acts like sort of a model home laid out to a potential home buyer, imagining how they would feel leaving there full time, right?
Yeah, definitely.
All right. The second question we have is, how do you find out what the strike is?
Yeah, so the strike is really kind of the biggest piece of this, where you're trying to find out, okay, like where should we drive people towards? And so in terms of how to really figure out what that strike looks like, I always like to see the retained users who has stayed around the longest and look at the product data and see, okay, what are they actually doing again and again and again? And depends on how early on or how late you are in your company, because once you have a multi-product, it could be very confusing. But what I usually find through just looking through the data is you can see very quickly, all right, like what are they doing? What are those features they go back again and again with? And so when I find those features, it's really just a matter of, okay, maybe we could actually lead with that particular part of the product and make sure that we set them up for success in that regard. And so product data is a really great way to see it, but it's also a matter of just talking to people as well. I mean, that's probably the worst answer you're going to get. But the reason, I mean, it feels like a bad answer is because talking to your customers is there's just no shortcut there. And once you do really kind of unpin, like, all right, this is what we need to do in that first time, it becomes a lot easier, because the way I look at onboarding, especially that first strike, I think that's one of the most important parts of it, is if you think about it like dominoes, it's a really great way of kind of reframing your onboarding. For instance, like what is that first domino that could get someone closer to that big strike? So I was kept giving the example of drip because I feel like the product's useless unless you have that first strike. Because if you don't upload that JavaScript to your website, you're not going to see value. And so in that example, it's really kind of straightforward to see, okay, that's what we need to do. But if your product is a little bit more complex, which I mean, many of them are, then it's going to be a lot of digging and really trying to see, okay, what are those main outcomes? And so the one kind of overarching framework that I'd recommend a lot of people to at least dig a bit more into is the overall like jobs to be done framework. I find it's really important to just nail down like what are those core outcomes that people are trying to solve with your product. And through doing user research, you can try and find that. But what I've seen companies do really well once they have those outcomes front, right, left, and center in their company is you can actually start aligning your onboarding with that. And there's an example by Wave. And if you want, actually, what I'm just going to do is exit here. And if anyone wants to see the example I'm going to refer to, it's productled.com/user onboarding. And so what they've done really well is just aligned, okay, here are the specific outcomes that you need to do, whether it is getting paid for your work, there it is, or organizing your finances, or capturing your receipts. And so that's what they identified as like, these are the main outcomes that someone comes to our product for, and let's guide people towards that in the onboarding experience. So that's what I'd really recommend to try and do whenever you're trying to figure out, okay, what should we do to get people to that first strike?
Sounds good. And I think tying to that, there's another question on whether it's better to use a progress bar or a checklist and have them done in whatever order.
Yeah, so both of them are really effective, but it really comes down to like, what is the purpose of the checklist, for instance? Do we really need to see all of the steps? If it is something where, let's say, it's all over the product, people need to access this one file or this something else in a different part of the product. Sometimes checklists work a lot better for that when it's a little bit more ad hoc. Where I see progress bars work really effectively is where it's really just a kind of structured experience. So in the sense of like the product tour here, whenever we're looking at this, we don't see the product or anything else. We just see, okay, these are the steps that are laid out in front of us. So when it's that kind of really catered experience and you can't see like, where's the end of the tunnel, progress bars work really well here, because you don't have to show people like, here's a bunch of text to read about all the other steps you have to do. It's just, okay, I'm getting closer to the end of this and I'm going to be done soon. Whereas checklists, let's say, even if we use checklists in an empty state, it's really effective just to show people like, okay, here are all the steps you need to do. And they're all kind of in different parts of the product. And so it's a really great way to kind of pick them up. And even here, like that is a progress bar, so you can actually use them in combination too.
Yeah, and especially when you use them in combination, I mean, they all lean on our cognitive bias towards completing a task, meaning you'll see a task and you feel that impulse to do it. But once you see the progress bar, it also gives you a bit of a celebration as you start checking things off the list, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And the follow-up to that from Malvin is, which is better, a video guide to achieve the strike or a step-by-step on-screen guide to achieve the strike?
So that's a great question. And part of it, it's going to depend on what kind of learner do you have. Like, does this person prefer learning via video, or are they just the person who's like, I just want the straight facts and get in and see this? And so that part, that being aside, what I've definitely found really effective is, let's say, if you don't have that video, actually guiding people through, let's say, tooltips through your product of exactly what they have to do in that product experience. And so that way, it's a lot less of here's someone else having success in the product and doing all the steps you need to do. And then you think about that experience, like maybe someone's going to YouTube in a tab, or even if it's in your onboarding experience, and then they have to remember like the steps. Whereas if you use onboarding tooltips, you're actually showing people where they need to go, what they should pay attention to, and how to see success in the product. And the next time they come back, they're actually going to be a lot more likely actually to remember what to do because we actually walk them through. This is just a little helping hand. And so I would actually recommend kind of leading with onboarding tool tips and maybe following with the video just so you can make sure that you capture both learners.
I completely agree. Still have time and energy for a couple more? There's a
Oh,
lot
for
of
sure.
interest
Go for
here.
it.
All right. Steven asks, what do you think of platforms that ask, what do you want to achieve? And you get to pick three options before showing them any details about the product. How do you think about those platforms?
Yeah, so some of those platforms do a really great job of nailing exactly what you need to do. So back to this one example, but even companies like Wistia, for instance, whenever they were getting their growth team started, they didn't really have that great idea of, okay, like this is exactly what someone wants to do whenever you sign up for the product. And so when I was chatting with Andrew, their marketing lead, what he recommended doing, which I totally recommends for any company that is still trying to figure out like what are those main jobs that people do want to get done in the product. When people signed up for Wistia at that one point, they didn't see a screen like this. It was actually a question and it led to a survey and it just asked them like, what are you hoping to accomplish today in Wistia? And so after a while, they started seeing a lot of similar responses and patterns. And so it really just helped them expedite like, okay, these are the things that people want to do in our product and let's make sure we can deliver on that as soon as humanly possible. And so I think in terms of, to answer the question, I'm not sure if I completely did it, but when you see companies that have done this, usually some thought has been gone into what those actually are, but if you're not sure, don't just go slapping on like, okay, here's the three things you need to do in our product. At least start with that one question survey to really get a better idea of what could those things look like, because sometimes it will surprise you what people are hoping to accomplish in your product, especially if you don't have your marketing aligned or product market fit.
Right on. And I think the last question is, how long do you wait to see if the changes in the onboarding are successful?
So that part really depends on just how many people you have signing up for your product. Sometimes it can be overnight. Like for instance, with the example of Snappa, they had thousands of signups every single, well, almost 1,000 every single day. And so for that one experiment, when we removed the email activation step, it was like almost clear overnight in terms of how quickly we're able to see the value. But for companies where that's not the case, which is frankly most companies, because that's a ton of signups. And so it really depends. Like you might have to wait a month or two to really see some of those early results. But if it's your first time building that straight line onboarding experience, you're most likely actually going to see the results fairly quickly. And so that's what kind of gets me excited about this topic is when you do roll out the changes, it might only take you a week or maybe a month to see some of those early results.
Thank you, Wes. I think the feedback on everyone's lips is, will we receive the slides? And we'll make sure to send the recording of today's webinar. And then the next question on the line is, where do they dive deeper into this framework? And I think this is where you can remind them about your book.
Yeah, so if you do want to dive into the bowling alley framework, chapter 13 in the product-led growth book, that's all it's about. It's just diving in through it. And in the middle of the book, which is all about the product-led foundation, I really do touch on just how to understand your customer better. And I think for at least some of the questions, just in terms of like, what should we be driving towards in that strike, it would be really helpful just even in terms of what are the questions you should be asking or how to really communicate some of the value to your customer. Because if you think about it, whenever we're onboarding, there has already been a ton of onboarding going on before, like when people are on your website and understanding what your product does. And if that doesn't align with what we're actually delivering in the experience, there's a big value gap. So the bigger that is, the worse your onboarding experience is going to be, the worse the conversion rate is. So in order to really understand onboarding, you have to have that foundation of understanding your customer, and then things get so much easier. So yeah, I think it'd be helpful for anyone if you're trying to get better at onboarding.
Sounds great. Well, Wes, I think this pretty much covers the questions. Any other questions that might come and we didn't get a chance, we'll make sure to get back to them. Thank you very much for your time today. This was an exciting and very insightful presentation.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And stay tuned for the recording.